everyone. Thanks to everybody for joining us for this session on protecting your business from cyber threats. If there's anything I can say about 2020, it seems to be the year of unexpected challenges. So it seems kind of appropriate that we're doing this topic this year for our alums. So whether you are managing remote employees for the very first time, or leading a school that's attempting distance learning, or maybe you just need to level up your password game, our two presenters today are going to share some practical and applicable tips that you can use in your businesses. So today I am joined by the leaders of one of AWEC's sister programs at the Center for Global Enterprise. Kristen Todd is the managing director of the Cyber Readiness Institute, and she's also the former executive director of the Presidential Commission on Enhancing National Cybersecurity here in the United States. And the other person needs no introduction, which is why I left him for last, is Chris Caine, who you all know. He's the president of CGE. And most of you have had the opportunity to meet him in person. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Chris and to Kirsten.
Thanks, Karen. And hello, everybody. Good day. This is an exciting opportunity for us. Kirsten and I have been trying to figure out how to help the AWEC community, the very impressive alums we have, in a way that's practical to your business. As you know, because you went through it, you lived the joy and the pain of the AWEC program. AWEC, the mission of AWEC really is designed to help you build a more capable and scalable business by sharing knowledge and collaboration. Well, the mission of the Cyber Readiness Institute, which Kirsten leads, is designed to help you build a more secure business. So if you have to think about, what you're taking from these community interactions among all of you and in connection with the Center for Global Enterprise, this is really about helping you in the same way that AWEC helps you build a scalable and a more capable management capacity. CRI, the Cyber Readiness Institute, really is here to help you build a more secure business. And as Karen referred to, so much of your interaction this year especially has become very digitally based. So our objective really is to give you a sense for the kinds of content and the kind of tools we have been creating at the Center for the Cyber Readiness Institute over the last 2.5 years. And Kirsten has been leading the way, speaking around the world. Our focus is around helping small and medium businesses all over the globe become more secure businesses, but also more reliable and more attractive members of supply chains and value chains for larger enterprises. So think about those companies who are your customers. Think about those companies who you are suppliers to. And we hope that what CRI has been creating and is going to enable you to do is to be a more secure and reliable enterprise and partner with those stakeholders. So at the end of today, our hour here, we're going to want to take a lot of, at least spend half the time on your questions. So please think about questions for Kirsten and myself about how do you go from where you are today to becoming a more secure business. But I want you to think about two things that you can immediately do when this is over with. And the first is to go to that website that you see in green on this slide called becyberready.com. I encourage all of you to go there, click on it, and it will take you to the door to open to become a more secure business, all right? And we think it provides you with a variety of tools, easy to understand knowledge, and a way for you to stay connected with the Cyber Readiness Institute. Okay? The second is to really think about how to start. And you'll see when you click on becyberready.com, you'll see something called a starter kit. Well, that's going to be a very easy way for you to begin this journey of doing things that are going to be in your interest and to allow you and your enterprise, whether, as Karen said, whether it's an educational business, whether it's a healthcare business, whether it's a retail business, you have to be more secure. And what we focus on is really your behavior, how you can alter your behavior and invest in your own behavior and the behavior of your employees to become more secure. So Mimi, can you go to the next slide, please? So this is the mission, as I referenced before. The Cyber Readiness Institute is about 3 years old now, and it shares cybersecurity best practices and resources and creates tools, easy to use, practical tools for you and many other companies around the world. And our real focus is small and medium enterprises, but our keen focus is micro small businesses. All right. So if we do not help you become more secure, if you are a very small business, then we are not achieving our objectives and we're failing. And we would like your feedback as to what we could do to make it easier for you to become more secure. Let's go to the next slide, please. These are the members. We have companies, as you can see, some very large and prominent companies: MasterCard, Microsoft, ExxonMobil, General Motors, Principal Insurance, PSP partners in Chicago, and CGE, which are the members of the Cyber Readiness Institute. They're contributing the financial resources to produce the content, to distribute the content, to sustain the momentum and the awareness of that cyber readiness is something you have to do every day, but it's not something that has to be complicated. It's not something that requires a big IT department. It's not something that is too much for you to do. In fact, cyber readiness, as you're going to hear from Kirsten in just a second, really is relatively easy if you focus on it and if you're dedicated to it and disciplined to help yourself. The next slide, please. So Kirsten, let me hand it over to you. And Kirsten is a great partner. We have a lot of fun and a lot of frustrations in this topic that we share together. And I think you'll see why she's the right leader for the effort. So Kirsten, over to you.
Thanks very much, Chris, and thank you, Karen, and your team for the opportunity to present. It's great to partner on this effort. And my only regret is that I'm not in a room with all of you, because even just looking at the chat, the energy and the enthusiasm for what you've created, and clearly what the mission of this organization is pretty strong. So I'm hoping that what we can talk about today is helpful to you, particularly as we are in this unusual time. With the recognition that all businesses now have a digital component. One of the things that we talk a lot about in cybersecurity is cyber is critical to the mission of every organization, regardless of what you do. And that's becoming more and more true in the pandemic and with this remote environment. But when we think about cybersecurity, we often think about technology. And that immediately is something that wards people off, because if you're not an engineer, if you're not a math and science person, or even if you are, there seems to be a very distinct set of capabilities and aptitudes that are needed. But really, cybersecurity is about problem solving, and it's about building solutions. And so when we look at that element, what we focus on at CRI is human behavior. The recognition that actually human behavior can be a force multiplier for security with just doing the basics and what we call cyber hygiene. And this really is never more true than it is today. And what's interesting is several years ago, when cybersecurity was evolving, there was a resistance to talk about the basics, because it was, oh, cyber is much more advanced and sophisticated. But what we know now, more than we've ever known, is that really a human being, and an educated human being, is the greatest asset for any business of any size. And I'll just reiterate what Chris said, which is we really are focused on micro businesses because of how those businesses are critical to global supply chains, but just to improve their viability and being able to look at how, even with 2 employees or 3, that you can actually make a difference in this effort. So what we focus on with human behavior is authentication, which really is just passwords. It's how do you get into your system. Patching, which are typically the notifications that you get on a computer. Phishing, which is a social engineering effort, and USB use. And I'll go into each of these in a moment. But all of these are grounded in human behavior. So an individual being educated enough to make a decision about how each of these can be prevented or can be addressed effectively. So Chris made the plug for our website, becyberready.com. That's where all of our resources are, and all of the resources are free. The objective that what we're trying to do is to create an online resource, an online repository, both of best practices that are out there, but the ones that we've also developed based on research. And specifically, the core of our effort is something called the Cyber Readiness Program, which is a self-guided 5-step program that helps your small business go through the necessary steps to be more cyber secure. The idea being that anyone can start it, anyone can finish it. And as you go through it, you've actually helped your employees and your business become stronger by focusing on these issues. What we also did in March following the pandemic is we started just developing a series of resources, very easy to understand, brief resources, 1 to 2 pages in most cases, that focus on the remote work aspect of the pandemic. So whether it's how to keep your workforce secure, your remote workforce secure, we partnered with a US government agency on a ransomware playbook. The idea being, what are the basic steps you can do to prevent ransomware? That in and of itself may sound like a concept that's too advanced, but when I tell you that it's just the very basic things about backing up information, it's something that anybody can do, and what it can prevent is pretty significant, and how it can make you more secure. And what we focus on by looking at human behavior is creating a culture of cyber readiness. We know that cultural change and working with your employees and working with individuals can be the greatest asset for any type of change, but cultural change doesn't happen overnight. So that's why, as we've established this program, it really gets the buy-in from each individual and from the environment. There's an individual within the organization that we identify through the program called the Cyber Leader. So it's somebody within your organization who becomes responsible for shepherding this program through. And what we're working on right now is a Cyber Leader certification, which gives that individual who's invested this time even more credential by doing that. And just as a reflection of our process, we have a small business advisory group that meets on a quarterly basis. The objective of that advisory group is really to get the feedback from small businesses who are using this program, because our resources, our program, are only as good as the small businesses that are using them. And one example is when we first developed the program, we were given guidance by technical people that a password that is 64 characters, or a passphrase that is 64 characters, is the strongest. So we went right ahead and put that into our program, and didn't take probably more than a day before we heard back from small businesses to say, that's great, but I don't have one application that gives me more than 15 characters. And so we went back to the experts, and we have revised that to now be a 15-character passphrase, not because that was what people had as a maximum, but what we learned was that was actually the ground floor of strong authentication, was actually 15. So it's important, just as we look at this, that we become as good as the small businesses who are using it, because if it's not usable, then it's obviously not going to be valuable. And what we want to avoid are workaround policies. In other words, we could put forward a very rigorous policy that's secure, but no one's going to be able to use it. So this
Kirsten,
is very much about the usability.
Can I I just want to amplify something you said. Kirsten talked about creating a cyber readiness culture in your company. You all chose to be business owners, business leaders, CEOs. It's really important for you to begin that culture, to live that culture, to project the culture, that you take this subject of protecting and securing your business seriously, because your employees will look to you and to determine for their own behavior, how important is it? And so the creation of a culture for cyber readiness starts with you as owners and CEOs and leaders of your business. You don't have to do it all, and that's what Kirsten was referring to in the next line, which is the designation or the identification of a cyber leader within your company. It could be you. You could choose to have it be yourself, but it doesn't have to be. But you do have to help create and lead the culture. So I just wanted to punch that, Kirsten. Sorry.
Thank you, Chris. And just one comment on that, because again, this culture is really the foundation. One of the things that we have found with a lot of the small businesses is that, and you probably all know this, the best way to create culture is when you're onboarding an employee. So if you're bringing somebody new into your organization in any way, if you just identify cybersecurity as a priority for what you're doing and share that with them, that you take it seriously, this is what you expect, the ability to then impact your culture is pretty significant. So we're actually working with a state in the United States on creating a program for onboarding all of their state employees to help make that point. And I'll go to the next slide, please, Mimi. So when we developed the program, we spent the first year, Chris mentioned that we're 3 years old. We launched in July of 2017. And we spent the first year of the program, of the organization, developing the Cyber Readiness Program. And it was ostensibly completed in August to September of 2018. And we then spent the next 4 months from September through December piloting the program. We had 19 companies from North America, Africa, Europe. The businesses ranged from 10 employees to over 1,000. And we had over 16 sectors included: agriculture, higher education, food and beverage. We had manufacturing and communications. And this again goes to the point that I made earlier, which is we're only as good as the organizations that are using it and to get the feedback. I shared the anecdote around the passwords, but we also had a very interesting experience with a larger company that's in the food and beverage service. A woman who was running it, who was their chief information security officer. So this example is not, the employees obviously don't marry or align with each of your experiences, but what was fascinating was she came in from the financial sector and had a lot of technical background. So she felt that, you know, she was pretty well in control of the cybersecurity. But she did do the program, and what she said was extremely valuable was the cultural piece. Because she said, I can have all the firewalls and all the technical terms about the technology that are in my organization to make it secure. But what I was lacking and where I had this gap was the education of my employees and just the basic understanding about what their role is. And that's why it was impactful for her. Because at the end of the day, what we're focused on is helping employees be empowered by the accountability and responsibility that they have for security, not to punish them for it, but to say you actually can improve this security of your organization by just doing very basic elements. So that's why this education and training piece is so critical. If we could go to the next slide, please. This is a fun slide. So one of our organizations that worked on the pilot program, one of the elements of the program is that we have posters that you can print out. This one is on passwords, you can see on the right, and then the one on the left is for phishing. So the passwords one has a connotation to the game board Scrabble, and then the phishing has a connotation to actual fish hooks. But the idea was by putting this type of collateral and communications material throughout your office, that you just hammer home the importance of this effort and how important cybersecurity is, but also that it doesn't require a lot. It just is the basic awareness and education. Chris, do you want to say anything about this example?
Yeah, I do. It's a business in Egypt, in Cairo. They're sizable, but who you're looking at here is the person who was our point of contact for this pilot company, and he printed out the posters that we had created within the program and posted them throughout the headquarters locations where he thought they were going to get the most traffic. The interesting thing about this was they also liked the program so much, they helped us translate it into Arabic. So one thing that's important for you all to know is that the program is translated into 6 different languages. It's in French, it's in Spanish, it's in Portuguese, it's in Arabic, it's in Japanese, it's in Chinese, and it's in English. So I just wanted to bring that to people's attention.
Thanks, Chris. Mimi, if we could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So this breaks out the Cyber Readiness Program. I mentioned this earlier. It's 5 stages, and we're actually in the middle of redesigning it to make it more accessible. The initial version was a little bit clunky. We thought that it just had too many steps, too many downloads, and so we're streamlining it, and we should be launching that by the end of September. So it'll be soon enough, so you can look at a before and after if you log on right now. And hopefully in a couple weeks. The first step is, we've talked about this a couple times now, it's just identifying somebody within your organization to be the Cyber Readiness Leader. And the objective here obviously is when you're focused on human behavior, you need somebody empowered with the ability to move your employees along. And again, it can be 1 employee or 2, but just the idea that someone has ownership of ushering this program through. The second step is to assess and prioritize. And this is where we really educate the employees on the 4 issues. And so I mentioned passwords. Patching really is about when you get the software updates that show up on your computer, it's to encourage all employees to click on it within 24 hours. Those really are the easiest way to prevent the vulnerabilities of the software from being exposed. You don't have to know anything about the software. You don't have to know anything about the technology. You really just need to be able to click update, because we are all guilty of just punting that and waiting to click on that because it's too inconvenient. But it's amazing how just by doing that and just reminding people that they need to do it is an important element to this. Phishing is social engineering, and we really have seen an uptick in phishing with the pandemic because everybody is online, and we've seen malicious actors really take advantage of some of the people's desperate state. In the United States, we have an agency called the Small Business Administration, and they were responsible for handing out loans to small businesses. So what you saw were malicious actors pretending to be the Small Business Administration saying, click here to get the update on your loan. There are different ways to do it. In the United States also, because each state has a different policy about when they're going to open up with the pandemic, you also saw malicious actors saying, click here to learn about your schedule for opening up small businesses or businesses in your area. So really understanding and taking into account people's psychological profile, which really is a big part of phishing, and it's the ability to leverage the data that's out there publicly is what malicious actors do. So phishing is about really taking care of and paying attention to email addresses, where things are from. It's very simple. You just click on the actual email so you can see if it's actually a legitimate email address. But we do a lot of education and just making people aware, not just of the techniques, but also what the current threats are. So for example, as I mentioned, all the things that are happening with the pandemic. And USB use is about taking the USBs that we all use to shift data from one computer to another. And really, we look down upon that effort because so much malware can be put onto a USB without people knowing it. The good news is, when we were talking about this 2 years ago, a lot of what we heard was, well, what are the alternatives? The cloud storage service providers have really increased in the last couple of years, and it's very easy for small businesses to get a subscription. A lot of it can be free. Some of Google and other companies have small business programs where you can just do it for free. And that's really what we're recommending in this. But in this stage, we educate around all of those and then help small businesses prioritize what to protect, because you can't protect everything at the same level. And that's really an important piece to this, as well as establishing the baseline metrics of your organization and how you're doing. And these are really just answers to several qualitative questions. We then, in the third stage, we've created a template policy that businesses can customize for their own purpose and then be able to commit to them and roll them out. And then in that rollout, we just talk a lot about how you get commitment from the organization. And then in the final stage, you redo the baseline metrics so you can see the impact that you have. In a slide in a moment, you'll see that over 75% of the small businesses that are using the program report a very high impact, and over 92% report impact of some level. And then we provide a certificate. Obviously, if you're going to invest any time in something, you want to have a demonstration of the time that you've invested. And so there's a certificate, which we hope will become more and more valuable as we invest in the global supply chains. And I mentioned the Cyber Leader certification that we're focused on as well. Mimi, if we could go to the next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that we, in the pandemic, have created a series of remote work resources. And so here are the ones that we have right now: securing a remote workforce, helping your workforce become cyber ready, some of the data protection basics. We talk about cyber ready culture, the ransomware playbook, which I talked about, frequently asked questions about the cloud, do's and don'ts, keeping educators and students safe. And we're now about to start a series on the hybrid work environment. So when businesses have some employees working from home and some working from the office, and some that toggle between the two, because that creates a different level of challenge and vulnerabilities. Mimi, if we could go to the next slide, please. Chris, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I want to, soon to be added to this list is going to be a focus on telehealth and what you as an individual, you as a parent, what you as maybe a healthcare practitioner or provider should know about telehealth in this era of the pandemic and digital delivery, especially as it relates to cybersecurity and cyber readiness.
Thanks, Chris. And if we could go to the next slide. And I will, before I go into these, I see two of the comments in the chat. Some of the baseline questions that we asked to benchmark are, do you have a policy on phishing? Do you have a policy on patching? Do your employees know what these things are? So again, they're very basic elements to this. I did share that 75% of the users who've completed the program self-report that it had a very high impact, and over 92% report some type of impact. And as we build out, we talked about our members at the outset with that logo slide. But one of the key elements to our partnerships and to getting this information out to as many small businesses as possible is we partner with what we call champions. And champions are NGOs, nonprofits, industry associations that have networks of small businesses, because obviously we are a small organization, and so we can't reach out globally on our own. And so we do that through our champion network. And through that network, our content has been downloaded over 80,000 times. And we, in addition to the 7 companies, we have over 70 champions that we're partnering with. And we've built a network of over 2 million small businesses globally, which we're constantly looking to increase and to improve the content based on that feedback. Chris mentioned that the resources are available in 6 additional languages: Spanish, Portuguese, French, Chinese, Arabic, and Japanese. And we have partnerships with champions on 6 continents. And so that global aspect to this is so critical because, as you all know, the cultural piece to building a business is important. And so we have to stay attuned and aware of all of the different challenges and all of the different resources available to small businesses so that we can be most effective for them.
You know, we certainly want you, and we think it's important for you to go through the program for yourself and for your business. But Kirsten talked about champions. If you find yourself in a community or among other businesses within your region who are all focused on this, after going through the program, clearly, you could be a champion for us. You could be an ambassador for the program to bring this kind of practical management readiness and hygiene to others in who you do business with, or not even, or just in your community. So if you have organizations and groups that you would like to bring this to, we're happy to support you in that process. We have people, Kirsten and myself, we have many other people who could be your partners in delivering that kind of community knowledge sharing if you are so inclined to do it.
Absolutely. And the partnerships really is something that we are looking to build out because it really helps us to understand what small businesses are experiencing and how we can be better at what we do. Next slide, please, Mimi. Thank you. So I won't spend a ton of time on this. This is just some of the global case studies which we've actually touched on. I mentioned the culture with the food and service company. The healthcare company was the example about the passphrase. What we've talked about, and I talked about onboarding, one of the key elements is, and Chris mentioned this early on, when small businesses are trying to work with other businesses, what we hope is that having a cyber readiness, a cybersecurity credential, the identification that this is something that you're focused on and that you're aware of, gives you a differentiator, that it's something that can actually distinguish you in a broader space. And while we know that to be the case informally, what we're looking to do is to actually formalize that even more. My aspiration for CRI is that the Cyber Readiness Program certification becomes actually a credential that makes a difference in how small businesses are working with other businesses around the world. And I think that it becomes important for when companies are looking to work with others to say, okay, I see that you pay attention to this, that you're taking the basic steps, and that all of your employees are involved, not just your IT department.
Yeah, having this on your website, having this on your Facebook page or your Instagram, whatever you are using to brand yourself, as we've talked so often in AWEC about branding, right? As Kirsten said, being part of the Cyber Readiness Institute and going through the program is another opportunity for you to differentiate your brand, right? Which is, you've been thinking about this, so if I'm thinking about doing business with you, I know that you're at least on top of where the trends are and that you're concerned about being a valuable and protected business and partner of mine.
Thanks, Chris. Next slide, please, Mimi. And these are just testimonials as we close out, essentially how businesses have responded. So training, ease of learning, a framework. Just the key to what we've provided in the program, and it's even more so in the remote work resources, is that these are very prescriptive, accessible ways of becoming more cyber secure. We're not asking for any technical knowledge, and when you just sort of play around with the program, you'll see that it's very easy to understand. And that's our objective. And if you don't, please let us know as well, because that is what we're really seeking to achieve. And I believe this might be the last slide, but if you could just change the next slide. Thanks, Mimi. So again, our website, this is an improvement. We've listed it 3 times. We tend not to promote, but it's really important that we do that. And I think the key, before we open it up to questions, and I turn it over to Chris for any final words, is it's important that each of you and all businesses and employees can do this. These are the basics, the foundation, and the basics do so much. And when you use human behavior as a force multiplier for security, it can be your most powerful asset. Similarly, an uneducated, untrained employee on this can be a huge vulnerability. And so what we're really focused on is empowering every individual within a small business to know that they have the ability to take on that accountability and responsibility for security. And so it's been a great pleasure just presenting to you and to our program and our content. And now this is the fun part. I look forward to the questions. But before we go to that, Chris, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, no, thanks, Kirsten. We want to get to the questions, and I think one last offer, which is as you go through the program and think about this, if you want to provide us with feedback and or be a member of our small business advisory group and our calls, you're welcome to do that. But I would just suggest that you walk through this first. I see some comments in the chat about this is overwhelming for an IT professional like you. It really isn't. Go work. Go get started on it. And if you do think it's overwhelming, then call us or contact us, and we will walk you through it. But if it ends up being overwhelming for an IT professional, we have failed. So far, people are telling us we haven't failed, but we're always seeking input and feedback. So thanks. Karen?
All right, Chris and Kirsten, thank you so much. Kirsten, you already stole one of the questions, but that's okay. You answered it on the fly. So we do have a mix of questions that we saw here live in the chat, and then, well, ladies, we're gonna, as you guys know, we're gonna continue to take those questions. So as we talk through this Q&A portion, definitely keep those questions coming, and we'll weave them in. And then Kirsten and Chris, we also, in these sessions, we tend to also weave in questions that are come up from our staff as well. So you're gonna see some that maybe you didn't see come up in the chat, and those are some that are getting generated by us. All right, so let's dive in. And I'm going to do a quick introduction of kind of who's asking this, so you get a little bit of a sense of where this is coming from. So this first question comes from Desiree. She works in entrepreneurship and media. She's originally from Zimbabwe and currently lives in the UK. She just waved to you. And so she says, you covered a few of the dangers of not securing your business, like clicking on fake links. Could you share some of the other risks and dangers that we should be aware of? What should we be looking out for?
Sure. So one of the other ones is in patching, and I talked a little bit about this. It's very easy because you actually don't have to do anything other than just click on the link. But it's important to get a little bit of background on what patching is. So what patching is when a company issues a software that's in your computer. And know that I am not an engineer. I'm not a technical person. So if what I'm saying doesn't make sense, you should absolutely push back on me. What it is so the software that's in your computer, and I will use Microsoft, so Microsoft Word, if they have found that there is a glitch in the technology and it's exposing something that allows somebody it's not secure, they issue what's called a patch. Think of it as just like a hole in a piece of canvas, and you have to put a patch over it so that the hole isn't exposed. And so the patch, all you have to do is click on the link, and it patches your system as it does everybody else's. So really clicking on those updates is important. We talked about USBs, and again, the good thing, as I shared, is that there are now a lot of really good options. There was a time when there weren't, and so people were just looking for workarounds. But USBs, the devices that you plug into your computer to share data, what can happen is malware can be put on those by manufacturers. So you'll see a lot of USBs that are produced in countries that may have malicious intent from an IP perspective. And it's one of the ways that a lot of IP has been stolen, because what happens is if you plug it into your computer and it has the malware will go onto your computer, but you won't see it. So that's why really the cloud is a secure way. Of course, there are vulnerabilities to everything. I think that's always, cybersecurity is risk management. There's no solution that's perfect. But what you try to do is make the best solutions for what you're trying to do. And again, so for a small business, that's why the cloud is important. And then passwords, we see this really across the board. And I think passwords are one of the greatest vulnerabilities if they're not approached, but it's the easiest way to stay secure, because there are technologies and algorithms that can just funnel through millions of passwords so that it can detect your password. So having a strong password, and what we talk about is a passphrase, because a passphrase is easier to remember, but it's also actually harder to decode. And a passphrase is a sentence. My favorite vacation was to Zimbabwe in July of 2018. That didn't happen, but I wish. I was in Ghana in 2012. But it's looking at what that is and how to do that. And the passphrase is important because it's much more difficult to decode. Something in the United States, which really isn't relevant, but it shows sort of sometimes the parochial culture of the US, is the easiest password to decode is that something like 30% of all passwords in the United States are the sports team of the city that the person lives in with the year. And so it's just to say that from a human behavior perspective, there are actually things that are pretty easy to decode. So having that strong passphrase is really important, because what your passphrase does is it gives somebody access to everything on your network. So if somebody compromises that, they can compromise your email, they can compromise your banking account, they can go into that. And again, that's not meant to scare you, because there are a lot of things that can prevent that, but it is an access point. And when we talk about phishing, if you access somebody's network, then you can find out something more personal about them. So I'll share just a quick narrative. We work with a large company, and cybersecurity people who are thinking about this day and night. One of the individuals was trying to get a visa to go to China, and it wasn't working. And she was having to go through a lot of issues with immigration, and it was one sort of firewall after another that was being put up. She got an email that said, your visa's been delayed again, but you need to fill out this form. She didn't even think about it, because psychologically she was going through all this frustration. And so she, who does cybersecurity every day for a large company, clicked on the link. So just to know that it's not about not being smart or not thinking, it's taking advantage typically of an emotional state. And that's why we've seen so much with the pandemic, because people are distracted and their priorities are shifted. And it's just a reminder of some of the challenges. And so I think the big key is always just to step back for a moment before you do anything. Rushing through, sometimes your things can create some vulnerabilities, but those are some examples. Does that help, Desiree? Okay.
So a couple things on that. One would be USBs. How many times have you gone to a trade show or gone someplace where they're handing out USBs, right? And you pick one up and you say, oh yeah, I need one of these, right? And you plug it in don't do that. One of our pilot companies, actually the pilot company that did the posters, said their salespeople came back to them and Mohammed and said, Mom, I have to use USBs. My customer only will share their information with me on a USB. And he said, so the salesperson said, I'm not changing, right? We're using USBs. So he said, fine, you plug your USB into that basically unconnected computer, right? This laptop, so that we can determine whether it is infected or not. Sure enough, it was infected, right? And the sales guy said, all right, okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess. But there is to Kirsten's point, you can create a safe harbor by having an old computer that you can plug a USB in and determine whether or not you have just saved yourself from being infected. Right? So that's number one. Number two, on passphrases, I think for this group, it ought to be AWEC is wow, wow, wow. Now that would be a good passphrase for you all to use, okay?
I'll say two things, just because I think it's important for everyone to always understand that everybody makes these mistakes. So it's like we're all in this together, regardless of what we do for a day job. Our first CRI meeting with our members in October of 2017, I'm with Chris and we're putting out the name cards, and I see these things at everybody's place. And I was like, Chris, Monica, what is that? Like, oh, it's our CGE USB drive. No, because it's just this awareness that, this is something, and, I see somebody wrote, no more gift USBs for me. It's true, because it's one of these things that we don't think can happen, particularly if we get it from somebody and all of that. I also want to address something that somebody said, which absolutely should have been raised earlier, which is multi-factor authentication is really critical in security. And so the ability to do that, and I think now we're seeing more and more companies offer that. But what is unfortunate is that you won't see companies default to that. And that's a private sector issue. Truthfully, I mean, that should be something that should absolutely be the case, which is that you shouldn't have to opt in to multi-factor authentication. It should always be there. The point being, you're going to have to opt for it. You're going to have to opt in to choose that. But whenever possible, multi-factor authentication is a tremendous way of strengthening your authentication. In addition to the passphrase, if you also have to do a thumbprint or facial recognition or anything else like that, it's an important one.
All right, love the conversation. By the way, ladies of cohort 2, wow, wow, wow was kind of a catchphrase from cohort 1. So if that came out of the blue, that's why. Chris is just bringing back an oldie but goodie. And Kirsten, when you brought up that anecdote about visas, I got to tell you, I don't blame that woman one bit. Visa sites are, as Dawn texted me, don't all visa sites kind of seem fake? And so it's kind of hard to differentiate which one's a legit and which is not. Even the official ones somehow don't look quite legitimate. I had a follow-on question actually to something that you said originally about passphrases. I want to clear this up in case somebody out there is sitting there thinking, great, I'm going to go out and change all my passwords to the same passphrase, and that will make me more secure. What do you say about that?
So the basic principle is that you should never have the same passphrase across multiple devices. But even more important, you should keep your business passphrases and your personal passphrases separately. The other piece to that is if you're ever breached, you need to change everything. So it's, this again is a management of risk, right? So if it's easy, if you want to just say, you know what, I'd rather just remember 2 passphrases, one for work, one for personal. I know I'm incurring a risk, but I also know I'm not going to forget them. Then you expose yourself to that vulnerability, to your point, Karen, around, what that could be. But the most important is that you have separate ones for business and work, and that if you're compromised, you change everything. Because while you may have mentally created psychological barriers between your work and your personal, particularly now, and when you see people using computers for, personal email and work email, you don't need to know how they do it. You just need to know that it's possible to jump from a personal breach to a professional breach and vice versa.
Yeah, this is really important in remote working realities that we all have in expanded versions right now. So the interchangeable use of personal devices and work supplied devices is just on steroids. So you really have to, it's a really good time to think about this so that you are not either contaminating your personal devices or your professional devices.
All right, great. I think that's the longest we've ever stayed on one question. So we're going to move on to the second one. It was all good stuff. So this next question comes from Yemi. She runs an NGO. She's originally from Nigeria and is currently based in Ireland. She is the one who originally, Kirsten said, this feels overwhelming for an IT novice like me. But I think you guys are going to like the second part of her statement. She says, so I'm guessing that it's that maybe we should have a cyber training day for staff and volunteers. And so for her case, because she runs an NGO, staff and volunteers of an organization. Would you recommend this? And how often should one retrain?
So it's a great question. And I absolutely would recommend it, because I think anytime you prioritize this as an issue and give people the time to focus on it, you can also get a sense of sometimes the disparity among your employees and how they're looking at it, or how much aligned they are. But typically, you can do, some people do quarterly, depending upon how you want to do the day. You could do one full day a year. But I think, if you did something quarterly, where as a reminder, if it was a half-day workshop, you can cover the basics with that. And I think what's important about more frequent training is if you make it more agile, more flexible, you can also talk about the current threats. I think one of the things about cybersecurity is that the threats are constantly evolving. And for example, I've talked about it several times, the pandemic, we're learning different ways that the pandemic is exposing vulnerabilities, and just keeping employees aware of what that looks like on a regular basis is important. So you can do the quarterly training. You can also do, an update, but I think that's a lot on an organization to all of a sudden designate somebody to be working on this if they're not already doing it. So training and education on a regular basis, whatever that looks like for you as an organization, I think is very important. And we're seeing a lot more of that happen. I'll also just share, there's something called a tabletop exercise, which I've done a lot of with different organizations, nonprofits and private companies, which just takes an organization through a scenario. And what's helpful about that is it kind of pushes people's imagination to think, okay, I wouldn't think that I was vulnerable to that, but that's something else. That can just be a variable way of educating and training, but certainly workshops, any type of education training on a regular basis, I think is very valuable.
I think it's really important. That's why designating a cyber leader within your company is really important, because you and your cyber leader will know the cadence and the culture in the environment in your company better than anybody else. And so instead of, our view has been, instead of us telling you you should do training every third week or every quarter or every half year, the program is really designed to start from within, right? And this idea of training, so much of its success aligns with the culture of your organization. If your organization is a learning organization by culture and by DNA, then you're going to have a much greater success with your training exercise. If it isn't, if it's a transactional organization and it's pretty much just by the book, then training on a regular basis on a topic like this around behavior and behavioral change is going to need some more thought and some more scrutiny. And that's why the cyber leader is so important to thinking out what is the best approach within the company.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question here is from Adelaide. She is in media advertising and PR, and she's from Ghana. And she asks, what do you think about password manager programs like LastPass, for instance?
So I think they're a great way to coordinate. And we're doing some research right now. Typically, CRI is not advocating for vendors across the board, but LastPass is good. There are a few that are out there that are definitely good. And I think if I were to use one, I would recommend just looking at general objective reviews of what people are saying about them. I think, it's sort of like the cloud and password managers, they're all helpful. You go in knowing that nothing is perfect, but they are certainly, they're a big step in helping you create and save remember passwords and access them. But by all accounts, everything that we have learned and understand about password managers is that they're effective tools.
That's great. Ladies, you heard it here first. You don't have to remember all of those really complicated passphrases yourself. I'm going to slide in here a staff question that came up. And the context here, particularly for you, Kirsten, is that many of our entrepreneurs use Instagram and Facebook to advertise, to sell their products. Are there cybersecurity considerations for those sites that they should keep in mind when they're using social media sites for digital marketing efforts, for e-commerce, things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question because, in general, I'll focus on Facebook, although Facebook, I think, also owns Instagram. The idea, Facebook definitely has not prioritized security. And so it's one of these where you have to go in eyes wide open with what you're doing and what you're seeing. I think the main piece is it's important to really look with a discerning eye on the information you get back from Facebook. So using it as a tool to publicize and to market outward is, I think, for all intents and purposes, because it's public, it's okay. Where we see a lot of compromise and vulnerability is the information that you get back. Oh, you've reached X number of people, or you've done X number of things. That's where the data seems to be very distorted, because there are, and I'll get a little bit technical, but there are what are called bots, which are essentially fake people that are out on Facebook. And it doesn't even have to be a Facebook malicious activity. It's just sometimes malicious actors, nation states will put them out there to make people think that there is momentum towards something, whether it's an idea or a product that actually doesn't exist. So that would be my kind of word of caution, is figuring out how you can discern the feedback, because I would assume that if you're marketing, you want to know how impactful your marketing is. Having said all of that, I think Facebook, from a business perspective and a small business perspective, that's probably the best use of Facebook over something personal, et cetera. But you just have to go in, all of the data that you would receive, you would want to go through and talk to Facebook. The thing about all of these companies, for better or for worse, is if you actually address it with them specifically, then you can work with them to get the data that you need. If it's something that's automated with them, typically that's not going to be what's valuable to you. I mentioned the multi-factor authentication, just examples that the private companies will not opt in for the best customized resources for you. So it's something that you have to ask for. And that would be, I think, from a branding and marketing perspective, just making sure that the data that you're getting on the impact of your message is as accurate as it can be. But I do think social media for businesses is a strong tool. It's one of these elements that I think can be very effective from an exponential growth perspective. But like everything, you just have to be aware. And it's one of those cases, certainly, where whatever you use for your Facebook profile, you would want to keep that separate and distinct from anything else that you're that is important to you, whether it's your login, your passwords, et cetera.
Great advice, thank you. So another question that we saw here in the chat, a follow-up question, I think, here from Desiree. So imagine that these small businesses are cyber ready, right? They've taken the steps. What can they do to encourage other businesses or suppliers that they work with to also pay attention to this? And bearing in mind, a lot of these are quite small, right? Quite small business, micro businesses, as you mentioned, that CRI typically works with. So particularly if they don't necessarily have like leverage on their kind of the size of their business on their side, what can they do?
So it's a great question, because obviously what we're trying to do is raise the bar across the board. I think this is where, as businesses, you can encourage other businesses to use the resources to go through, you can be as specific as to say, if we're going to work with you, can you please go through the Cyber Readiness Program or other resources that are out there, but we'll use obviously CRI for the purposes of this. But what we have found with this is that it's not that people resist, it's that they don't know where to go. So actually, as a small business, you could be very helpful and constructive with your other suppliers to say, hey, here's a very easy program that you can use, or here's some resources that they've provided. Can you go through it? It's a question. I'm not sure if you're asking if you would do business or not do business with a company if they didn't do it, or if you're just trying to be collaborative and supportive, which is to say, hey, here's where these resources are. Because what we find across the board is oh, thank you. I didn't know where to go for this, or what I saw on this website was too complicated. And that's really what we want to be, is a very simple, straightforward place to get this information. So I would just encourage the small businesses and suppliers to go to the websites, to the tools. What we're also looking to build out are links to other tools and resources that are out there. So it's just a reminder that, hey, this isn't difficult, particularly if you've gone, the best referral is somebody who's an entity that's gone through it, to say, we did it, it's easy. This is what we learned. Hey, this part was a little bit hard, but this is how we figured it out. And so often with cybersecurity, it's very much about the narrative and the psychology. We often, again, think it's, strictly in science and math, but it's so much about how we talk about it that can make a difference.
Look, as a business owner, you're going to want to know what your marketplace and what your stakeholders are like. And if you offer, right, to these stakeholders and customers and partners, that there is a set of practical tools that will help them become more secure, and they say no, you've now learned a great deal about them. And remember, this is your business, and you want your business to be successful and secure. So at the very minimum, if they say no, you now know something more about them than you may have known in the past, and you can factor that into the point about, do I really want to do business with this person, or how much of a risk is doing business with this person to my business, and am I willing to take that risk? But you'll know more than you did before. especially on something that could crush your business very, very quickly if you don't know.
All right, we've just got about 6 minutes left, and I want to make sure we get a couple of these questions in here that are very Africa focused. And some of these are coming from our staff as well. So much of Africa is mobile first. And oftentimes we're not even talking about smartphones, we're talking about feature phones. How do any of these recommendations that you guys have talked about today extend to phones, that kind of behavior?
So that's a great question, because I'm a big proponent of mobile security. And I think that mobile security is something that we're still figuring out how to address and how to use. So it all applies to phones. The big thing with phones is authentication. Certainly USB use is not as applicable, but phishing and authentication. So making sure you've got multi-factor engaged and implemented on your phone is really important, and paying attention to phishing, because and you would all know this as extremely well, we have more information on our phones than on any other device and really in the history of the world. When you think about everything that's on your phone, and oftentimes now you can't access things unless you have an app. And so typically you're going to do that through your phone. And so it's keeping the authentication is really important. The other piece that I'll mention is that there are vendors out there, not a lot, that do mobile security, which do kind of a vetting of your phone on a regular basis to say, where the apps are fake or where an app has developed a vulnerability. And so those types of technologies, and most of them are free for consumers. I would, look into that. I'm happy to talk to you about a couple of them. But the other piece that I'll mention about phones, which is just really important, is that when we have apps that we're not using, those become some of the greatest opportunities for vulnerability. So if you go to a conference, and now even virtually, you'll see it, you'll get an app for the conference to say, hey, look at the agenda, which is all great. I mean, that's absolutely great. But then what happens is sometimes those entities don't kill the app. And so you've left the conference, it's 4 months later, you still have the app for the conference on your phone. If you're a malicious actor, that becomes a huge open door, because no one's paying attention to it. You're not paying attention to it, you're not logging on it, the people that created it aren't paying attention to it. So just do an inventory of your apps on a pretty regular basis to make sure that you have the ones that you're using that's on there, and that you have strong authentication for all of your apps. And Karen, this goes to one of your earlier questions about passwords across multiple devices. When you have apps on your phone, you would definitely want to have different authentications for your apps, because once you access the phone, that can be just a dangerous gateway to a lot. So really strong authentication, multi-factor authentication is one of the key pieces to keeping your device secure. But having one of these technologies that's free, that will do a vetting of your apps to make sure you haven't downloaded the fake bank one as opposed to the real one, is just really important.
I'm putting that on my to-do list today, and the staff is all laughing because we are hosting a virtual leadership summit in a week for a week and a half for our current cohort, not the alums, and we do use a conference app. It's called Hoova.
But everybody does.
But rest assured, we do close that particular event instance after it's over. But we were all laughing because, yeah, of course, we all use these things. Okay, I want to try to squeeze in, if we can, one, maybe two more questions. We just have a couple minutes left. So one of the questions that our staff wanted to ask is that we hear a lot from our alums that customers, particularly in Africa, are hesitant to make purchases online. So how can they use cybersecurity, or the fact that their business is now more secure, to ensure the safety of e-commerce? And then how can they communicate that to their customers in a way that makes them feel more comfortable buying from their businesses?
Yeah, so it's another great question, because I think, e-commerce is one where people have different risk appetites for it. And that's where I think the narrative around what you're doing becomes important. So first, from the perspective of what you can do, is if you follow these basics to keep your infrastructure secure, and investing in that security, you're doing a lot to keep your entity and your e-commerce infrastructure secure. To help customers feel more comfortable, share with them how you've prioritized cybersecurity, what you're doing to be secure, and how you're doing it. And if those two then are aligned, then you've created a story. There are some people that are just going to take some time to get there. And I think if you can create momentum about perhaps statistics about how many of your customers are starting to use, purchase from you online, having people understand the community of online consumers, also, it can be very helpful. And so this understanding that, okay, a lot of people are doing it, I understand now, or if it's an investment in what you're doing. So I think often when it comes to security, it is creating that narrative for them so that they feel comfortable that you've taken the appropriate steps. But there is, everyone is going to be a little bit finicky about what they'll do and what they don't do. I still don't put a credit card in my phone. Plenty of people do, right? I mean, it's just this hang up that I have about, I don't want to put a credit card in my phone. But I will absolutely go online and purchase things. And so it's the understanding that people have the risk appetite. But I think if you can share with your consumers and clients, customers, all that you're doing and share with them how many people are starting to purchase online, then that creates a community of security. And it's also, you could also give them updates on things that you're doing from a secure space, from a cybersecurity space.
That's great. That's great. Kirsten, do you need to go immediately, or
I don't.
Can we do? Okay, perfect.
Absolutely.
Let's do one last wrap-up question, and then we'll see how it goodbyes. What is the single biggest mistake that you see SMEs making out there in the world when it comes to cybersecurity?
It's thinking that they are not targets, or that they're not vulnerable to cyber vulnerabilities. One of the things, I'll use a big example and then I'll use a smaller one. It's, why should, no one's going to target me as a small business. And there are two pieces to that. The first is, you may not be the destination. You may be an access point to somebody else. Or if I can access somebody within your company, I can then get to a bank, or I can get to something else. So it's a reminder that you may not be the destination. You could be part of the journey to malicious activity. But it's also that, a lot of what we see in the business model for malicious actors is not one big, event, but it's a lot of little ones. So ransomware is a great example of that, because ransomware typically is between, the ransomware where somebody's files are frozen, a company's files are frozen, and the only way that they can be released is a payment of a ransom. That's $10,000 US dollars up to $50,000. We had a case in the United States last year where a small local government had a ransomware, and the ransom was $60,000. They responded to the malicious actor, said, we can't afford $60,000, but we can afford $8,000. And the malicious $8,000. So the malicious actor said, okay, we'll take $8,000. So what it is they are, a lot of times malicious activity isn't about a ton of money, but it's about enough so that it's not necessarily going to register on a broader scale. And it's just important to remember that it doesn't have to be big. It can be small. So it's this recognition that regardless of the size of your company, you're a business that's connected to others. And so everybody is vulnerable to a cyber attack. Similarly, it goes back to, there's a US adage where, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the person next to you running away from the bear. So it's this idea that you want to be as strong as you can, because your resilience and your strength will detract malicious actors from coming to you, and they'll go somewhere else. So just a reminder that cyber is a huge vulnerability for everybody, and investing in it doesn't take a lot, and the ROI on the time and the effort that you spend can be very high.
Those are great last words. Thanks so much, Kirsten. I think this was more enlightening to our alums than they maybe anticipated it would be. Also, I think more enjoyable than they thought this topic might be going into it. So thank you very much for spending this time with us. I know that Chris messaged me. Ladies, Chris had to go. He had another call that was starting just a couple of minutes ago, and he had to go prep for that really quickly and make that on time. So he sends his appreciation, his thanks. It was good to see you guys. He's sorry that he had to jump off early. But Kirsten, thanks so much. This was really great. We appreciated all the anecdotes that you provided. I think that you have both scared people a little bit, but also given people the tools to help themselves. And so I think that you're going to, hopefully you guys will see a healthy little hit to your website soon as people start to explore the resources and see if they can make themselves faster to outrun that bear, as you put it. So ladies, it's always good to see you guys. Thanks for joining us. Do put it on your calendar. We look forward to seeing you again October 29th for a master class being delivered by your fellow alum, Brenda Nakalema. And this one's a fun topic, guys. It's focused on confidence, the ultimate superpower. So this is gonna be a fun one for all of us.
I want to join that one too.
We'll send you an invitation.
So Karen, I did put my email in the chat, but you should have it. Please feel free to share it. And if anybody has any follow-up questions or anything else they'd like to communicate on, I'm happy to do so. I appreciate the time today and the opportunity to talk to this tremendous group.
All right. Thanks so much, Kirsten.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Talk soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.